This is how the Afghan War began. After 20 years of fighting in Afghanistan, foreign forces have finally withdrawn their respective troops after an agreement was reached between the United States and the Taliban. The Afghan conflict has killed tens of thousands of people and forced millions into refugees. Reporting from the pages of the New York Times, a few weeks after the al-Qaeda group attacked the U.S. on September 11, 2011, President George W. Bush announced that U.S. troops were launching attacks against terrorist groups and the Taliban in Afghanistan. This measured and controlled attack was designed to deter Afghanistan from becoming a base for terrorist operations and to attack the military capabilities of the Taliban regime, Bush said at the time. The U.S. holds al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden responsible for the attacks on the U.S. that killed more than 3,000 people. Bin Laden is in Afghanistan, under the protection of the Taliban, the Islamist group in power since 1996. Bush said the Taliban, who then controlled almost all of Afghanistan, had refused his request to hand over the al-Qaeda leader who had been planning an attack on the U.S. from their base in Afghanistan. He said the attack was aimed at bringing the al-Qaeda leader to justice and, now the Taliban must pay the price. At the time Bush also warned that the military operation, called Enduring Freedom, would be a lengthy and unprecedented operation. In December 2001, Osama bin Laden and a number of al-Qaeda leaders fled to Pakistan, a U.S. ally. U.S. troops did not hunt them down and Pakistan became a safe haven for Taliban leaders. In Afghanistan alone, U.S. troops easily overthrow the Taliban government. In December 2002, a Taliban spokesman offered a surrender measure which the U.S. refused. Nearly 20 years later, the U.S. finally agreed with the Taliban for a ceasefire and negotiated a political transfer of power with the U.S.-backed Afghan government. NATO troops joined the U.S. and Afghanistan's newly formed government in 2004, but the Taliban's attacks have never subsided. Still, the U.S. and NATO are trying to build an Afghanistan in the style of a Western democracy, spending billions of dollars to build the impoverished nation ravaged by 2 decades of war. The pro-Western government has finally been established. Schools, hospitals, public facilities were built. Thousands of girls, who were banned from going to school during the Taliban era, were finally able to go to school. Women were finally able to go to college, work, and become members of parliament and government officials. Independent media emerged, but corruption is also rampant. Hundreds of millions of dollars in development and investment were diverted. The government is unable to meet the basic needs of its people. The troop buildup under President Barack Obama was at its peak, with nearly 100,000 U.S. troops stationed in Afghanistan in mid-2010. The move was able to suppress the Taliban but not for long. In May 2011, elite U.S. Navy troops killed Osama bin Laden at his hideout in Abbottabad, Pakistan, where he had lived for nearly a year near a Pakistani military training site. In June of that year, Obama promised to begin withdrawing U.S. troops and handing over security responsibility to Afghans by 2014. In 2014, the bloodiest year since 2001, the Pentagon concluded this war was militarily unwinnable and only peace talks could end the conflict. NATO international forces ended their mission, leaving Afghanistan in the hands of the Afghan military. With war conditions on hold, Obama ended major war operations on December 31, 2014 and shifted to training and assisting Afghan security forces. That's when the Taliban got a chance and managed to seize a lot of territory. 3 years later, President Donald Trump said that while from the outset he intended to withdraw all U.S. troops, he stressed any withdrawal would depend on conditions on the ground, not a time frame. The Trump administration has also started dialogue with the Taliban since 2018 without involving the Afghan government led by President Ashraf Ghani. Peace talks between the U.S. and the Taliban have taken place several times and the agreement to withdraw U.S. troops began with negotiations in Qatar in February 2020. The deal said U.S. troops had to leave Afghanistan by May 1, 2021. In return, the Taliban promised to cut ties with terrorist groups such as al-Qaeda and the Afghan branch of ISIS, reduce violence and negotiate with the US-backed Afghan government. But the deal did not mention the consequences if the Taliban did not fulfill its promise. This US-Taliban deal did not stop the Taliban's attacks. They then switched to launching attacks on Afghan troops and civilians. Their territory is getting wider. In terms of casualties, it is difficult to get exact figures. The death toll for coalition forces is better recorded than for the Taliban and Afghan civilians. Research by Brown University estimates the death toll on the part of Afghan forces at 69,000. And the civilians and militants killed each reached 51,000. More than 3,500 coalition troops have died since 2001, about two-thirds of U.S. troops. More than 20,000 U.S. troops were injured. According to the United Nations, Afghanistan is the third largest country in the world whose citizens are displaced. Since 2021, some 5 million Afghans have been displaced and have not been able to return. Brown University estimates the U.S. spent $978 billion in war and reconstruction in Afghanistan and Pakistan through 2020. U.S. and coalition troops killed stood at 3,586. Afghan police and military killed 75,971. Civilians, including humanitarian workers, journalists, contractors, 78,314. Opposition forces, including the Taliban, 84,191 people.